So, like, most of the time when a game bombs, it's really easy to tell why it bombed while you play it. At least, this has been my experience up until now. When I'm playing a game that's getting 6 out of 10s, it feels like a 6 out of 10. If you've been paying attention to any of the media around gaming right now, or you just read the title of this video, I don't know, you probably know exactly what game I'm talking about. I saw reviews for Fallout 76 shortly after it came out, and they were not the review scores I was necessarily expecting. I was expecting them to be bad. Not necessarily bad, I should say. I was expecting 7s, maybe 6s, somewhere in the realm of what Mass Effect Andromeda scored. In the, it was okay, but it's not good. It was a disappointment in that end. But what I wasn't expecting was GameSpot to give it a 4 out of 10, and Giant Bomb refusing to review the game at all. Fallout 76 seems to be the worst thing ever right now. And I feel like I'm going crazy, because I feel like I can't understand these scores. It's a strange feeling. It's bizarre. I've never really been in a position like this. Like when No Man's Sky came out, and I enjoyed it, but I could easily understand why people wouldn't. I could easily pick out why the scores were where they were. It made perfect sense to me. But I don't get these scores. I've been playing Fallout 76 for maybe 40 or 50 hours at this point. I've chewed through a lot of the game's content, and I'm really enjoying myself. I think this is possibly my favorite one of the Bethesda Fallout games. I do say Bethesda because I'm specifically keeping New Vegas out of that, because New Vegas is vastly superior. But out of 3 and 4, I think 76 is the superior game. And that's a fucking weird thing to say right now, because I think I'm the only person on the planet who's actually saying that. At least if, YouTube and the general games media right now are any authority on that. It's mind-boggling. I have a hard time wrapping my brain around the game doing this badly. Because at its core, Fallout 76 is not a bad game. In fact, it's kind of what people have been asking for since, Morrowind. Before I get into my entirely unscripted thoughts on this whole scenario, I want to draw a very specific line of delineation. I'm not talking about Fallout 76 being a good game in a holistic sense. Fallout 76 has some serious and unacceptable technical errors, especially on the PC. It's got garbage optimization and dogshit problems that really should have never made it out of QA. The stash limit is utterly insane, and I understand that it's a technical problem, but it's a technical problem that should have been solved before the game came out. The game's optimization was embarrassing. Even on the PS4 Pro, where I'm playing it, I still dropped sometimes down to 20 frames per second before their first major patch. This is an unacceptable state to release any game in, even by Bethesda standards, who've really become the masters of unacceptable states to release your game in. So if we argue Fallout 76's quality on the merits of technical fidelity, I lose immediately. There is no way this game should have released like this. And if you're out there considering buying Fallout 76, I'm going to paradoxically tell you not to. It's just not a good investment in its current state. I hate to say it, because I'm about to say some really good things about this game. So what the fuck am I talking about? What's the point of this whole video? Why did I pull out my microphone and dust it off just to talk about this game? Because Fallout 76 is, really, really good at doing what Bethesda arguably does best. So let me get into my thoughts here. There are two kinds of people who generally play Bethesda games, in my honest opinion. There are the people playing it for narrative reasons, people who want to experience a story through the main quest and through its side quests and interact with that narrative. And then there are the people who load into a Bethesda game, get through the tutorial, pick a direction, and just start walking. and finding all sorts of stuff along the way. So I want to address the first camp first, the people who enjoy these games for their narratives. And I gotta ask, how incredibly world-shaking were the stories of the first two Bethesda Fallout games? I mean, of course, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. Were these games' stories really that interesting? On the aggregate, I don't think I can possibly say that they were. The first game, Fallout 3, has you following the directions of basically everybody, while you act as basically a side character in your own story, while people like Lyons and your father do the actual heavy lifting of moving the plot along. And with an ending so bad that they literally had to retcon it, I wasn't really digging the story. But Fallout 4 is an improvement in this aspect. Its story is somewhat more cohesive, and you have somewhat more agency within the encapsulation of that narrative, which is nice. You like to actually feel like you're participating in a story and not just being dragged along as a generic NPC to another character through a story. But even then, it wasn't really world-shaking. The synths are an interesting concept, the Institute was an interesting concept, but all the good things in Fallout 4's narrative really come down to its world building and not necessarily the narrative throughput. The big twist at the end of the game wasn't even really that interesting, and the open question about whether or not your character is a synth is unfortunately answered. Probably the most interesting part of that story kind of went nowhere interesting. These are, of course, just my opinions on the Fallout games and their stories. The original Fallouts had much more interesting and deep stories, but that's because they were much more nuanced and asked a lot more questions than these ones did. The most interesting question Fallout 3 asks you is, are you a terrible person who will murder hundreds of people by setting off an atomic bomb, or are you a nice person who will tell the rich people who don't like that town to fuck himself? No, when it comes to the Fallout games and all Bethesda games in general, I'm a lot less interested in the story than I am what Bethesda's actually good at, in my honest opinion. And that is a mixture of world building, environmental storytelling, and absolutely insane detail. Going into any Bethesda game, you're going to find a lot of locations and a lot of little dungeons and a lot of little stories scattered all over the place. You're going to find notes, you're going to find visual indicators that people once lived in a place, and you're going to be able to piece those stories together yourself to find an interesting narrative tied in with the game's world. And that's what Bethesda's really good at. It's building interesting game worlds that draw you in and make you want to find those stories, find that interesting stuff that happened. Unfortunately, this penchant for world building doesn't really extend to their central narratives as much as it does their environmental storytelling, their side quests, their discovery, their exploration mechanics, because that's what Bethesda's really, really good at. It's why they haven't changed their engine in God knows how many years, because their engine is really good at doing that fine detail work, even if it's not good at literally anything else. That exploration aspect of Bethesda games, that environmental storytelling, that going out into a world and finding out what's interesting about it, has always been what drew me to the Bethesda games. Even though I disliked 4, I've still got a lot of time in it. Even though I disliked 3, I still beat that game twice. It's a game where you go out and you find and discover a world that you wouldn't be used to, in a way that really no other studio has ever managed to pull off. I don't want to puff piece Bethesda, because they do a lot of stupid shit, especially in regards to their games, but you gotta cut them some slack. Nobody else really makes an RPG like Bethesda makes an RPG, even if their games aren't even really RPGs anymore. The depth and breadth of detail that goes into Bethesda open worlds is why we don't talk about Bethesda open worlds in the same breath that we talk about Ubisoft open worlds. Except for right there where I just did it. Bethesda's games feel different on a very fundamental level, and that's because of that level of detail and that level of care taken in building a world that is interesting to discover and explore. And in my opinion, that's always been at the heart of what makes Bethesda games good. It's why I have over 400 hours in Skyrim and have never finished that game's narrative. So where exactly does that leave us, though? Fallout 76 is, in and of itself, an exemplification and perfection of Bethesda's game-making, you could call it philosophy or ethos. It's the absolute perfect representation of what Bethesda is best at, in my honest opinion. Perfect is probably too strong a word. It is taking a Fallout game and focusing only on what Bethesda is best at, and not what they're mediocre at best. It strips out the exposition dump NPCs and stories, and unfortunately some casualties of that are some of the characters we've all grown to love. But one of the advantages of that is that we ditch a lot of the stories that we've all grown to dislike and kinda despise. Fallout 76 is a game that is specifically about exploring a world. It's not about following a narrative. It's not about discovering a story and talking to NPCs and making your way through a complex web of intrigue. It is a game about coming out of a vault after the nuclear apocalypse and discovering what the world is now. And in that, this game has got a shitload going on. There are narratives and there are stories. There is a sort of puzzle-style, I guess you could call it, central narrative going on throughout the entirety of the game, in fact. And this involves things like unions, mining concerns, radiation, nuclear silos, the Enclave, the Brotherhood of Steel, a bizarre mineral that cropped up underneath the world. And all of this storytelling is done in the way that Bethesda does it best, through exploration and discovery and visual storytelling, environmental storytelling. They do it all through a mix of excellent world building. And then they top it all off with some fairly okay shooter mechanics and some okay RPG mechanics and multiplayer, because why the fuck not? As I mentioned, Fallout 76 is something of an exemplification of Bethesda's unique brand of gameplay loop. As the great Joseph Anderson pointed out in his video on Fallout 4, it follows that same loop of explore, clear out a location, loot it, repeat, that all of the other Fallout games, and arguably all of the other Bethesda open world games, have done before them. But it just focuses all of its resources on it. It makes its locations bigger and more interesting. It fills them with more stories, with a lot, I mean a shitload, more lore and more depth within its characters and within those places. And it generally comes away with a stronger world because of it. And yet, it's doing so horribly. And I think that it probably should do pretty horribly right now. The way Bethesda released this game, the state that it was in, is kind of an insult to that exemplification. You had a really excellent Fallout game that you marred with such horrible technical decisions and details just because maybe you didn't want to push back a release date. It's painful to me to see that. But what's more painful is seeing people say that this game is fundamentally broken or fundamentally wrong, that a multiplayer Fallout in this style is fundamentally non-functional, and I just don't believe that's true at all. If you're somebody who plays these games because you enjoy the narrative, the main quest, the side quests, the characters, you're probably not going to enjoy this as much as the other Fallouts. In fact, I can almost guarantee that, because you're going to have to go out and find your story. You're going to have to piece it together from audio logs, from the environment, from the world. You're going to have to put that story together yourself. But if you're somebody who enjoys going out in a Bethesda game and picking a direction and starting your walk, making your way through the map, clearing through all sorts of interesting locations, and discovering the story as you go, you're probably going to have a lot more fun with Fallout 76 than any of the previous titles that Bethesda has released. And again, I'm completely exempting New Vegas from this because I think that game is a fucking masterpiece. Fallout 76 is not fundamentally flawed. It is flawed, and it's flawed in some pretty serious ways, but those flaws are not core to the experience that is Fallout 76. They are simply bad decisions on the part of the developer and the publisher to release a game in an incomplete state. It's not the first time it's happened, and it certainly will not be the last, and Bethesda should suffer for that. They should understand that releasing a broken game is never the right option, even if it means sticking to a release date. A delayed, excellent Fallout 77 that I get to play in January would be much more interesting than a released Fallout 76 that I get to play right now in a terrible state. So, learn to delay. It's okay to delay. It's okay to hold back and make sure that those games actually get the love and care that they deserve instead of just shoveling them out the door. Because then you wind up with a tragedy. A bad game is a bad game because it can't be made better without rewriting the whole game. That's stuff like Bad Rats. That's stuff like Mass Effect Andromeda. It's stuff where the very core of the gameplay experience is just not that interesting. But a tragedy is the kind of game that comes out and is good, but is marred by fundamental, or not fundamental, but technical flaws and limitations that reduce the experience down, bring it down to a lower level than it should have been. Because Fallout 76 is a really fucking good game, but you should not buy it. You should hold off on that sucker for a couple of months until they get a couple of patches out. They fix the stash size bug. Maybe they add a few things to the game. Just making sure that it works, for the love of God. Because, as is, Fallout 76 is disappointing, but at the same time, it's fantastic. It's my favorite Bethesda Fallout game, and it is also an example of the worst of Bethesda bugs and Bethesda bad releases. And now we may not even have mods to fix it. So hopefully, Bethesda learns from this, and hopefully they take away the right lesson. I really hope this game turns out more like No Man's Sky, where the team behind it saw the flaws with their game and worked for a year to fix them, releasing update after update, despite their game getting a lot of hate. I really hope to see Fallout 76 freed from the shackles of its technical limitations and brought up to the standard that we all kind of expected from Fallout 76, because at its core, if you can get past those technical problems, Fallout 76 is a fantastic game. At very least for a certain subset of people who play Bethesda games. And I'm really trying not to suck Bethesda's dick here, because they really fucked up. But there's a big part of me that hopes that this game is successful, despite its release, despite its problems. But only successful after Bethesda gets their shit together. But until then, please stand by.